Hi, everyone. We are so thankful that you're here. This is the FirstRoot conference on participatory budgeting in schools. And we're going to cover a wide range of topics from practitioners to how we're building this great software platform to some of the visions that we have for the future. Along the way, I'm really excited that we've got a few people here. Our dev team, a bunch of our dev team is here. We've got some investors present. We've got some supporters around the world. We've got, again, practitioners and academics. And I'd like to, again, thank Knit Marketing, a fantastic firm that I've been working with for a few years now, and really thankful that they're with us. So let's get started. My keynote, my kickoff is going to be about how giving youth money can save democracy. So what's all that about? Let's think about it. We tell our youth that knowledge is power, but they see that power comes from money. And we tell our youth to get involved, but they can't vote. How can anything change if so few people control so much money? And how can you make a change if you can't vote? Well, power may come from money, but change comes from people. And what we're doing here, we're building the world's first platform for democratic financial decision-making in schools. How? Well, we give students a real money budget. We support them as they decide how to invest that money. And of course, we know that that's participatory budgeting, and they get to make real change happen in their school with real money. It's amazing because they get to experience and harness money power. So now I'm going to work on that normal presentation, because that start is usually a pretty bold start, and it gets people engaged, and they're like, whoa, okay, put money in the hands of kids. What's really going on here? Well, a little bit about me. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm also a philanthropist, having co-founded a nonprofit to promote civic engagement. I'm noted as part of the Agile software movement. So I've served on the board of the Agile Alliance, and I've done a variety of projects for the Scrum Alliance, and I've written a few books. I'm also a husband and a father of 4 wonderful kids. And I've got a deep and rich history of providing solutions in participatory budgeting. The last company I founded was Conteneo, and it was founded to deliver participatory budgeting solutions to global enterprises. And in the private sector, we helped name brand companies, such as the ones you see here, administer more than $3 billion through participatory budgeting. Along the way, I fell into, if you will, an opportunity to do some pro bono or some free work in participatory budgeting in the city of San Jose, eventually forming a nonprofit, Every Voice Engaged Foundation, and that was founded to provide participatory solutions to governments and schools. And that organization over several years helped administer more than $1 billion. Now you roll the clock forward, and it became an opportunity, or an opportunity materialized for me to sell Conteneo to Scaled Agile. I completed my integration tasks and started FirstRoot last year. Now, Every Voice Engaged Foundation is no longer working on participatory budgeting solutions for governments, because a lot of that work can be done now through some of the open source platforms. But there's really no good solution yet until we built it for participatory budgeting in schools. So who are we? Well, we're a benefit corporation, which is it's designed to create a public outcome that is beneficial to the world. And our public outcome that we're seeking is better financial literacy to overcome and address the harmful effects of economic inequality. And everyone in this conference is going to know that participatory budgeting, it's a deeply democratic process, but we frame it for students in schools. So we actually give money to collaboratively invest in their school. And we know that that goes through 5 distinct phases. The students are involved in designing the process, such as what is the theme and who participates. Then there's a divergent phase where they create proposal ideas. which they then refine into specific things that can be acted on or voted against. Eventually, they're going to vote on which proposals they want to implement. And in the last phase, and sometimes it's the most satisfying phase, it can be a lot of work, but it's a lot of satisfaction, where you can actually put those winning proposals into action. Now, why are we doing this? What's the deeper motivation for our firm? Well, let's look at some data from McKinsey. We know that wealth and income inequality is both increasing and causing massive harm. And this issue is global. If you look at the data where you can correlate income and wealth inequality with health and social problems, you actually see that the more unequal the society, the greater the damage from health and social problems. So the US is the world's most unequal society, and we have the worst outcomes relative to such things as incarceration rates or opiate addiction or levels of trust. So it's a fundamentally deeply flawed structure, and we need to fix this. And the economic impact of this is really profound. If we can get a handle on this, McKinsey talks about trillions of investment, but we cannot get there only by looking at the economics. We have to also understand what's happening with democracy itself. And we're finding that in every major democracy, the levels of trust are on the wrong trend line. We're decreasing levels of trust around the world. And what's really frightening is this research was done by the Pew Research Center in 2018. And according to the Pew Research Center, in 2018, Russian citizens had a more satisfaction with their government than US citizens. To me, that's a fundamental problem, but it's a problem that's global in nature. Now, if we can fix this, if we can address this, McKinsey estimates that at least in the US alone, we're going to see trillions of dollars of economic value, which means that this problem is both affecting everyone, and the benefit of solving this problem, in a sense, the rising tide will lift all boats. Truly, everyone benefits from greater economic and wealth equality. So how is our solution organized? Well, we know that there's a well-defined process, participatory budgeting. That's not enough for schools. What we need is absolutely easy to use software that runs on any device that those kids are going to use, because the kids in schools right now, especially because of COVID, they're just using everything that you can imagine, from Chromebooks and Macs and PCs and tablets and iOS and Android. You just have to work on every device. You also need to have a curriculum that supports the teachers and the students in all phases of participatory budgeting. And that curriculum needs to focus on more than just factual knowledge. It has to create skill-based lessons so that students learn the skill, how to make the judgment, and they have to understand their own dispositions. Are you more risk tolerant or risk averse? Are you more conservative with your money, or are you willing to be more liberal in how you spend it? These are deeply personal values. These are deeply personal skills. But if we're going to have financial literacy, we have to have a curriculum that covers all of these areas. Now, sometimes for people who are new to PB, they get worried. They're wondering, well, what are students going to do? So let's look at 3 of our pilot schools and look at some of the work that they did. At Purdue University in Indianapolis, Indiana, they invested in a mini library and a new pergola. Now, I did not know, I'll admit, what a pergola was until they voted for it. And then I did my own research. Well, pergola is the covering above chairs that partially blocks the sun. So it's a place for reading. Now, let's look at what students in Hegel Elementary School, they voted for a tree, soccer nets in, and with a big smile on my face, they voted for fidget toys. And I love this because it really illustrates that when we put students in control, they are going to vote for some things that are fun, and I think that that's okay. Sometimes, though, the things that the students vote for is really profound. At the Academy of American Studies, they voted for more feminine care products for the girls' bathroom. And that's a pretty profound choice when you think about what the students are saying that they need to have a safe and effective environment for learning. Now, where does the money come from? We often get that question. School principals typically have discretionary budgets. And in the US right now, we have ESSER budget funding, which is from the recent CARES Act that was passed by Congress. So school principals or school districts have discretionary funds that they can allocate. Parent-teacher associations or organizations have funds. And we even have partnerships that we're developing with corporate social responsibility programs. We're working on a project right now in in San Mateo, California, Hillsdale High School, where a Salesforce executive made a donation to the school and Salesforce matched it. We're also working on a program right now with Rotary International in Sunnyvale, California, where Rotary is making a donation through the Rotary Interact program, which promotes civic engagement. So we're starting to see that there are sources of funds to initiate these programs. So how does it really work? Well, you can go to our website or our app, you can create an account and configure the program, such as what's the overall budget and who participates. And then our app takes over, and we've designed it so that students always have something they can do. There's always something available for the students to be guiding them through the app, and they create, refine, vote, and fund their proposals. When it's done on the implementation, the teacher or the school administration will purchase and implement the student-funded proposals. In general, we recommend that the students focus on capital expenses for two reasons. First, capital expenses can usually be implemented fairly quickly, so the students see direct benefit from their work. Second, capital expenses do not encumber the school to future expenses. And that can make school administrators a little nervous when they start making commitments that are future expenses as opposed to immediate expenses. We are seeing in New York City some schools experimenting with participatory budgeting for operating expenses, which is quite exciting. And typically those kinds of changes and those kinds of enhancements are after a school has had some experience with the program. So here's some screenshots that our fantastic dev team has put together. You can start to see that our app is very gorgeous, and there's actually elements for any of the participants or for any of the conference attendees. If you're using Among Us or Instagram or Snapchat or other social media applications, you can see a lot of those design overtones in what we're working on. Here's an example of a science and tech proposal that has been more fleshed out with an estimated cost. When it moves into voting, you can see students have an individual voting ballot where they can fund something, or if they don't like it enough to fund it, they can still indicate with an emoji how they feel about the proposal, and they can keep track easily of which proposals they have provided feedback against. When they're done, you can see the total amount of money spent. So the app is making participatory budgeting easy. The converse, and I've seen this in-person participatory budgeting programs, is that it's just too hard for schools to implement a PB program. Think about the voting results or the ballot. You've got to collect the proposals. You got to put them on paper in Word or PowerPoint or Excel. You got to print out the paper. You got to distribute the paper. You got to get the votes. You got to tally the votes. You got to make sure that the votes were completed properly. All of that stuff is what computers are designed to do, make the voting process easier. So that's what we're doing here in our app. Now, civic engagement is built into our processes and our recommendations. And over time, you're going to see that schools will be able to run participatory budgeting programs with more than one school involved. And so a proposal created in one school that might affect other schools can be shared and funded across the community. An example of this is we have seen one high school fund a improvement to a park where the park and the playground were actually contained in an elementary school. But since all the high school kids had gone to that school, they knew what that school needed, and they decided that that elementary school had greater needs than their own high school. And we see this consistently. We see kids who are involved in participatory budgeting, they just make great choices. Now, some people want to know what our pricing model is. So how is our company going to make money? So let's talk about it. Our pricing model is designed to make it easy to get started and easy to scale. So the get started pricing is if you have a classroom or a club, like, and by club, we mean, say, a dance club or a debate club or the band or a sports club. And here it's $1 per student for our app and all the supporting materials. And you start with 25 participants. For a school who might want to run multiple programs at the same time and add our financial literacy or civics curriculum, it's going to be $10 a student. And the advantage to the school is you get more performance reports, more analysis. You also get connections to things like single sign-on and some other capabilities. Over time, that single school is going to be part of a network of schools, either a school district or a charter school network. And that charter school network will be able to, or the school district will be able to manage even bigger budgets. Earlier, I talked about how FirstRoot is a benefit corporation. And we know that as financial literacy is developed, it has an inexorable component of what my home environment is. So as we're teaching kids in school about financial literacy through participatory budgeting, we want to make that knowledge available to all members of the family. So our family edition, which supports up to 8 participants, is free. And it's going to use such activities as planning a family vacation, planning charitable donations, or planning home improvements as a means by which you can draw the entire family into healthy conversations and talk about financial concepts that are really important for kids to understand. For example, most financial planners would agree that taking a mortgage or a loan to get a house is probably a reasonable investment, but taking a loan for a family vacation is probably not a good investment choice. And now there are, of course, extenuating circumstances all the way around, but I'm talking about the general case. But if you're a young child and you see your parents acquire money for a home, but not acquire money for a family vacation, it can be confusing, right? Adult behavior can be confusing to kids. So by providing families with supporting structures, we can enable them to take the same approach to financial literacy and engagement that the kids are using in school in the home environment. As a company, we are very excited about participatory budgeting. It's endorsed and recommended by the United Nations. It actually started in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 1989, expanded quite nicely into Europe. We're seeing it also in Africa. I was one of the first people to bring participatory budgeting into America, starting in 2011 with the city of San Jose and helping expand it into other cities across the US. So we see a lot of opportunity in other parts of the world. Accordingly, we have constructed our app with a global first mindset. So the app is already localized into multiple languages, and we will be building out materials that enable other cultures around the world to use participatory budgeting in the same manner that it is being done here in the US. Thank you for coming to our conference. I'm really excited about the many speakers we have. And purposely kept my conversation short so that we can jump back to, I'm assuming, do we want to go to Wheelo, Rebecca, or do we want to stay here to answer any questions that people might have?
I think we should stay here just because we're all here already.
All right, we're all here already, and I'm looking forward to someone being brave enough to ask me some questions, and I'd love even hard questions. It doesn't have to be easy stuff. I'm comfortable with people asking me tough questions.
Luke, it's Harry Max.
Hi, Harry.
I have a question for you.
Okay, I'll make up an answer.
What question should we be asking you?
What question should you be asking me? That is one of the classic ways to really get the conversation going. I think one question that you should be asking is, does this work in other cultures? Like, you know, maybe this is like some kind of a overly Western approach, or does this really work in ways that would allow other cultures to benefit from this process? And as near as I can tell, this does work in cultures around the world. I have had the benefit of doing participatory budgeting everywhere from Bogota, Colombia, to Tel Aviv, to Sydney, to Edinburgh, to various places in Europe. And I even have some friends who are in South Africa who are doing participatory budgeting in South Africa. And there was a recent report from the United Nations about many places in Africa that are doing participatory budgeting. So as near as I can tell, this is a capability, a process that does work around the world. I am also confident that as we continue to expand around the world, we're going to see local variations in how the process works best, but I'm not entirely sure what those variations will be. I'm excited to find out. Mr. Dorley asks, how can we integrate participatory budgeting concepts into organizations? And are there any pros and cons about PB? So let me take the first question. I spent over a decade building participatory budgeting solutions for enterprises. And when I mean enterprises, I mean companies. And so if you mean companies by organizations, I would submit that that's something that we've been working on for quite some time. Now, if I share my screen again, I'm going to show you where that work is manifested. Can you confirm that you can see my screen? Yes? Okay. So if I go to the Scaled Agile framework, this is the framework that has been adopted by many of the world's largest companies building software. And it's a very, admittedly, it's a sophisticated framework, but it's meant for organizing large groups of people in building software. And as you can see, at the top of the framework, there is a portfolio level for portfolio decision-making. And you can see that that has things like strategic themes and portfolio vision. But if I go back to this, you can see that right here, I've got participatory budgeting. So there's an entire article that I wrote for this framework where you can see, and I'll send it to everyone so you can grab the article, and you can see that this is how we recommend participatory budgeting as the process to allocate portfolio budgets inside enterprises and organizations. And this article kind of talks about the process itself, how to organize it and how to execute it. Now, I want to point out that the processes that we use for participatory budgeting in business are more sophisticated and more complex, if you will, than the processes that we use for PB in schools. For PB in schools, we're talking very small amounts of money, $2,000 to $10,000. I've worked on participatory budgeting programs in business where we were allocating as much as $2 billion in one participatory budgeting session. So those are huge differences in numbers. Even if you don't get into the billions of dollars of range, it's common in business for portfolios to be 50, 70, 90, 200 million dollars. And as you can see, those need different kinds of processes, but it's still grounded on this idea that I want to bring people together for conversations. So for those of you who are interested in how would I do participatory budgeting in business, I would be an advocate, or I am an advocate of how SAFE does it. And you can start to see the differences in businesses and in schools. Then the next thing that Mr. Dorley asked was, are there any pros and cons about PB? I don't know a lot of cons about PB as a process. I know that when PB is done in person, the biggest con or the biggest negative is that it's too hard to administer. So what I have seen is cities and communities start participatory budgeting programs, and then after 2 or 3 years, they stop doing it because it's just too hard. It's too costly, too slow. And you kind of think to yourself, right? We're all walking around with phones and computers and tablets and laptops, and you just think to yourself, there's got to be an app to make this easy. So that's what we've built. At FirstRoot, we've built the app that is explicitly designed to make participatory budgeting really easy to use. Mr. Dorley, if you have any other further questions, please put them into the chat, or just take yourself off mute and join in. And let me know if that answered your questions. Moving on, we have another question from Harry Max. When or how and when does it make sense to call or engage FirstRoot? Pretty much any time you can engage FirstRoot. Now, there are some natural boundaries that make sense based on the timing of the school year. FirstRoot is specifically focused on participatory budgeting in schools. So we're going to follow the school year. In North America, our school year tends to start in August and September. In the Southern Hemisphere, it's a little switched because of the weather patterns. And so the school year is going to be a little shifted, but you want to kind of align participatory budgeting, if you can, to start relatively in the early part of the school year. So kids come back to school, teachers come back to school, we're settling in, we're relearning what school itself is like now that we're coming back into school after COVID. So after a couple of weeks, it'd be a great time to initiate a PB program. It's going to take 2 to 3 months to really execute that PB program. But if you can start at the beginning part of the school year, you get the benefit of the kids who participate seeing the results of the work that they've done. And it is just so powerful when kids see that adults are listening to them, that adults trusted them with money, and that adults are implementing their ideas. It's amazingly powerful. So in general, we try to recommend timing PB with the structure and timing of your natural school year, and doing it at the beginning of the school year so the students get the benefit of the process. Now, what I wish Zoom had was a IP address map that would show us all of the different locations that people are connecting from. And I know that there are many different locations. I am in Sunnyvale, California. So it might be a little fun to type in where you're connecting into the chat, just because I think it'd be interesting to see. And it's kind of a demonstration of just how broadly, this is interesting. So we've got California and Pennsylvania in the United States, Minnesota, all right. And there it is. The people from Mexico so far are coming in as part of our dev team, and I'm really excited that our dev team is involved because it's really exciting for it. Oh, Taylor's in Lake Tahoe. That's very lucky of you, Taylor. And we have Seattle, very nice. So I'm going to turn this around. Has anyone on this call had a chance to do participatory budgeting in a school other than me and my dev team? My dev team, I'm going to count out too, because they write the software that our pilots and partners are using. Has anyone had a chance to try it? Yes, for everyone, Lee is one of our presenters, and I am really excited to have her involved. It's going to be really exciting to hear her talk. I'm not going to say anything other than it's going to be great. It's going to be a lot of fun to have her involved. But I'm not going to say anything more about what her talk is going to cover. I'm going to let her do that. Yeah, no spoilers. The planning process. Taylor, do you have any specific questions? Because I think the planning process is one of those really kind of interesting aspects of the PB cycle and the PB program. I think planning can be uniquely interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I love the planning process, especially figuring out how PB talks to the curriculum of a particular school and what in the curriculum needs to be addressed in a different way, whether in the classroom or in a co-curricular setting. Some of the skills that PB allows students to practice. So I'm not sure how to formulate a question, but I am very curious to hear more about the curricular components of FirstRoot.
All right. Well, we've got a talk to. It's funny. This conference is warping my brain because I'm going to say tomorrow, even though the talk started GMT 0, which means it's just the normal part of the day for other people around the world, which is kind of, a brain warping thing. But we are going to have a talk about our curriculum tomorrow, and we're going to include some of the design principles that we leverage in building out our curriculum. And again, no spoilers. You're going to have to come to it tomorrow. Yes, the time zone struggles. One other topic that I think is worthy of our community to address is how do we create the trust that enables us to create bigger budgets for the students? It's easy to imagine a participatory budgeting program of, say, $2,000 or even $5,000 or even $10,000 in a high school. But the kids that we work with, they have really good ideas. And those really good ideas are often much bigger than $2,000 or $10,000. my experience has been that if you were to walk up to the parents and the teachers and say, we're going to put $2.8 million in the hands of our kids and let them work on how to make the school better, they'd get nervous. Now, I don't think they should get nervous, but they would. So does anyone have any thoughts in the chat, or take yourself off mute, about how could we build the trust that enables people to feel comfortable with giving students large budgets?
I'll offer one thing. It doesn't quite answer the question of building trust, but just going back to your global map of earlier, I know in some regions in France, the whole community is involved at some level of the PB process, usually just voting. So they're student-generated ideas that the parents in the community can buy into by voting also themselves. So in certain communities, that might be a good way of engaging all the stakeholders.
So building trust, I'm going to put it in the chat log, is include parents, is what I heard.
Yes, and teachers. That's also a practice in some teacher-powered schools here in the U.S. That also is so important for engaging buy-in of what the projects are going to be, and making sure that those are implemented and the cycle is completed.
All right. Any other of the participants have thoughts on that? I'm kind of curious. I
have a thought.
Okay.
I had another thought, which is that it would be interesting to actually run a funny money version, like a Monopoly version, but then do the translation to real dollars after the fact. And that way you build the trust on not real money, and then you can decide, depending on what budget is available, how much would be applied and what the translation would actually be. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just typing it in so that we have it in the chat log kind of experience, if you will.
Got it. Yeah, I was driving, so I couldn't do it that way.
Yeah, no, it's cool. Yeah. Oh, so you've got a vote on that idea from one of the participants, which is good. Any other thoughts? How do we build trust is kind of one of the big questions I have, in terms of, because once we get more trust, we get access to larger budgets, and access to larger budgets creates opportunities for greater impact.
I would, my kind of theory on building trust in general, not necessarily related to participatory budgeting, but just in general, is asking a ton of questions. I work with young people. My team is mostly teenagers and young adults, and they start out with me like not knowing anything. I don't know anything about them. And it's mostly the way that we build trust is just having that open communication, getting to know them getting to know me. And I think there's probably a huge space for that in starting these PB cycles.
So I love that. I love that notion of, getting them involved, asking questions. Taylor added, show the school board the quantitative and qualitative results, right? Show them, look, this is what happens when you get kids involved, when you give them an opportunity, and when you let them drive certain parts of the process. And I do agree with that. I think that when you see, when adults see what kids do, they really do have a greater sense of trust. Like, wow, that was a good idea. We can, in a very real term, we can actually trust the kids. We can actually make something great happen with the kids. So I love that. I've got to call a couple of friends out if they're still, with me. And Michael and Jeff, you have a lot of experience in building trust in organizations. And I'm only calling them out because I've worked with them. So Godwin and Kemi, I'm also, thinking of what you might be able to add to the table. But how, Michael and Jeff, when we're talking about these kinds of things, what are some of the strategies of building trust that may either be applicable or may not be applicable to what we're working on here?
Yeah, it's funny. The first two things that came to mind for me was start small. It doesn't have to be a massive amount. Just start, just try it and build the trust with proof from past, action. And so can we just carve out a small amount that we can just try? Maybe it's, $500. Maybe it's just something to start with. So that's the first thing, is it doesn't have to be a lot to start. It's probably most important to just try it and get going. The second thing is, what sort of guardrails could we put around here? If there's this risk that the kids are going to run off and do something crazy, well, we can probably mitigate that. Can we put in some guardrails of the type of spend or the type of allocation that's in there that can help build the trust?
I'm going to talk about that guardrail concept in a second. I want to leave the floor open, though, if Michael wanted to add something or if anyone else wanted to add something about building trust, because I think that this is really critical. We're creating a movement as a team. Everyone in this conference, every attendee, every speaker, we're the leaders right now. We're creating something really different and really new, and that's going to require trust. Because some people are going to feel threatened, even though we don't want them to feel threatened, they're going to feel threatened. So how do we show them that this isn't threatening, that this is, in a sense, exciting and engaging? Michael, do you have anything that you'd like to add from your base of experience?
I think authenticity is such a big part of it, that if we are promising something to our group, promising something, or just saying this is what we're going to do, then as we've got to follow through on it. It's, and that also falls under the not just talk it but walk it.
Okay. Not just talk. And so I'm going to go back to this notion of the guardrails. One of the things that I talked about is in the process that I had 5 stages. Secretly, for everyone in this call, there's actually 7 stages, because there's 2 stages that we ask the adults to get involved with. And the first stage is the ballot preparation. So when we go from refinement to the vote, we have to create a ballot. Now that ballot is the choices that the students can make. So we ask the adults to be involved in building the ballot so that if they want to reject any ideas, they reject it before the students see it. Now there can be really good reasons to reject ideas. Let's say that the students wanted to buy some new chemistry lab equipment and they were unaware that the school was planning to refurbish the chemistry labs. So we've seen sometimes where the adults have said, no, we don't want you to vote for that because it's in our budget. Next year, we're planning on refurbishing the chemistry area. So don't vote for that, vote for other things. So that's when we believe that having the opportunity to review those proposals before they go on the ballot is building trust as a guardrail. And then once the items are on the ballot, then the commitment is no matter what the students pick, the adults will implement. And that's that follow through, Michael. And it's really, really critical to have the adults truly follow through on the student choices.